actively involved in the cooperative. And some additional pictures. The one on the upper right, that's local to Indianapolis. That's Mayfield Green. They have about 300 plus units. Some are townhouses, some traditional looking apartments. So they're basically three different types of housing co-ops and then a hybrid of any of the two. So a leasehold, limited equity, and market equity. And we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about each one. So a leasehold is a unique hybrid of a rental situation and a cooperative. So the property is leased from a landlord or nonprofit organization and the cooperative operates as a cooperative, just like any other cooperative would do. But unlike other housing cooperatives, members don't generally have an ownership stake. In other words, they don't own a piece, they don't have a financial investment so that they own part of that cooperative. Would be similar to renting an apartment, although it's not called renting in the co-op space. The major difference, though, is even though you don't own a piece of the cooperative, you do have the ability to be actively involved as a member in the cooperative, how the cooperative is organized, how it's run, how decisions are made. You can serve on the board, you can serve on committees. So you still have that those principles of being a co-op without actually having an ownership stake in the facility or in the building. And this is very common in the affordable housing arena, and a number of leasehold types of cooperatives are located throughout the central Indiana area. Limited equity is, again, unique in the co-op space. The co-op, the people who are members of the co-op, adopt bylaws that limit the resale of the cooperative units. So you buy into the cooperative at a certain point, a certain level, say it's $100,000. And within those bylaws, and we'll talk about the options there in just a minute, are provisions that tell you when you sell that unit, say you decide to move on or a member of your family lives there and passes on, then there is a maximum resale that's dictated by the bylaws of the organization. It often, the strategy here is to maintain affordability and retain the value of the co-op. And the formula that's used is unique to each co-op. So a co-op here in Indianapolis can be a limited equity housing cooperative. And in their bylaws, it may say, when you sell the co-op, it can only appreciate 3%. There could be a cooperative in South Bend that has a totally different formula for the resale of the unit. So it's unique to each housing cooperative. So some examples of limited equity, it could be that it's a zero equity or no equity. So when you buy the cooperative unit or the ability to live in that unit and you sell it, you're not making any profit. It's simply what you pay for it is returned to you less any debt that you owe to the co-op. Could be a constant dollar, which is indexed to something like the consumer price index. Limited percentage. This could be, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps it's the value of the home increases 1% a year or 0.5% a year. So that percentage is based on some formula, something that's housed within the bylaws of the organization. Limited resale, the maximum resale price is increased each year based on, again, a set amount. something that the members of the co-op have determined. And then there can be any combination of those. So it could be a hybrid of those. Market equity is exactly like it sounds. So if you buy the ability to live in a particular unit inside of a cooperative, you're able to sell it at market rate when you decide to sell it. You also buy it at market rate. So it's whatever the market will bear at the point of purchase and at the point of sale. So it's very similar to buying and selling a home or a condominium. One of the big differences between a condominium and a market rate housing cooperative is that in a condominium, you actually own the unit in which you live. In a housing cooperative, you have a lease to occupy a specific unit in the building. So it's a little bit different. And another huge difference between this market equity cooperative and a condominium is that condominium owners don't have any say in who purchases a unit in that condo. Whereas in a housing cooperative, the members make those decisions. So they have a say in who buys a unit or the ability to live in that housing cooperative, and it must be approved by the board of directors. And in all these scenarios, whether it is the leasehold, the limited equity, or the market equity, it is still a cooperative with the same principles and values as any other type of cooperative. It's member owned. The members have one member, one vote. So all of those principles and values of any type of cooperative are present here in the housing cooperative as well. So why a housing co-op? So it does offer affordable home ownership, which is critical to equity accumulation and also helps stabilize communities. With member ownership, again, the housing cooperative exists to serve the members. So there's not that overriding profit motive or some third party entity who is driving how the cooperative is managed. It is the members themselves. Usually the transaction costs in a cooperative are less than if you were buying a traditional home with a conventional mortgage. And again, that member control, when you own your own home or you live in a cooperative and you own that unit, the ability to live in that unit, you're much more likely to be a better steward of the cooperative's assets than if you were in a rental situation in a traditional apartment complex where you had, no stake in that game. You do have a stake in a housing cooperative, no matter which model you choose. And also, as a resident in the housing cooperative, you can build skills. So if you choose to get involved in a housing cooperative, again, as I said, you can choose to serve on the board. You can choose to serve on committees. There's all kinds of ways to get involved in the housing cooperative, either as much or as little as you choose to have. And by being involved in the operation of the cooperative, you're building all kinds of leadership skills that can be transferable to other things that you do outside of your housing cooperative. So with that, I will turn it over to Hugh.
Thanks so much, Deb. And I really appreciate the sort of survey here. I'll be pretty brief because I really feel like I'm filling in just a few things that Deb touched on, and I want to make sure that we just kind of keep space open for discussion. But yeah, just as a brief introduction, my name is Hugh Farrell. I'm here in Bloomington, Indiana. I've worked with two organizations that I think have some bearing or relationship to this. One is Bloomington Cooperative Living. The other is Avalon Community Land Trust. And the kind of core, maybe like legal argument that I would make is that in terms of this kind of range of options that Deb is putting out there, that the interesting thing about Indiana, which has a really long history that Deb in particular could say way more about in terms of rural cooperatives, all kinds of different cooperative enterprises. Indiana does not have a cooperative statute. So there's nothing in state law that both makes it easy to, sort of check a box and become a cooperative, nor is there anything that kind of pushes you into a particular box when it comes to what kind of cooperative you are organizing, which is a little bit different in some other states that might even have uh, like a more of a one size fits all, easy to use cooperative statute, but that also push co-ops in certain directions. And so I think that that's kind of an exciting thing that we have where all these kinds of options that Deb are talking about, different kind of equity arrangements, in our experience is that they basically function like kind of a sort of a equalizer slider bar, for volume or bass or treble. You can adjust, based on how you write your bylaws. You can really make different arrangements kind of freely to produce different outcomes. So for me, that's kind of an exciting element of Indiana, the Indiana co-op potential for housing co-ops. And that maybe the thing that then implies is that we really need to support each other and kind of be able to share resources, experiences, language from bylaws, and that, we can overcome the kind of complications that come with not having a cooperative statute through cooperation. I'm seeing a question. So this is basically a matter of debate. This is something that we've been talking about for a few years of whether it's good or bad. I'm trying to talk about the sort of silver lining, and given the relative unlikelihood that the state legislature will prioritize pushing through a co-op statute, I think this is kind of where we're at. And that so long as we kind of have a stronger and growing cooperative ecosystem, I think we can deal with the difficulties from not having a statute, while basically taking advantage of basically instead of having access to a cooperative structure legally, everything we do in the state, as far as I understand, and Deb, again, just is going to know more, especially about this history than me, but everything is generally structured through either a 501c3 or an LLC to produce different kinds of cooperative outcomes. Both BCL and Avalon Community Land Trust have tried to open up space for different kinds of cooperative development, basically by using 501c3 structures that create different kinds of possibilities for sort of co-op organization. So I'll just talk about those two briefly. Bloomington Cooperative Living is a 501c3 that is, and I think that within Deb's scheme, I would say that we have elements of both leaseholding and what she called a no equity, or what maybe we would call a group equity cooperative structure. And basically our bylaws are written to set those elements up. And we have 5 houses, 2 of which are essentially leasehold, where we are acting as a property manager for a landlord. And these are our 2 most student-heavy houses that basically, because they're next to campus, the landlord has a kind of clear choice of whether he wants to rent to an organization like us, or maybe, and again, I say this without prejudice, I'm just trying to sort of talk about the facts of the rental market here, but really these houses would otherwise be rented to like frat style groups. And his experience was that those groups tend to trash the houses and also not deal well with vacancies throughout the year. They're just not organized for stable cooperative living. And so it's in his interest as a landlord to rent to us at something like a wholesale rate. This is an imprecise term, but he gives us a discount, and we essentially act as a property management company that's able to offer significantly cheaper rents, membership fees, as Deb was saying, to residents who then democratically, cooperatively organize the house, and it's just much more stable than this landlord would otherwise be able to enjoy. Our other 3 houses with BCL are, basically owned by the organization, and the meaning, this is kind of a glass half empty or half full kind of terminology question, but some people call them no equity, or the other option is calling them group equity, but it basically means that people pay a monthly membership fee into the organization that gives them right to a particular room. And that means that we have the benefit of not having the need to invest in the organization. It's not like one of the limited equity co-ops that's very typical of a place like New York, where you have to buy in with 100,000, or these days more realistically like $600,000 even for a basic co-op apartment. And instead, you're able to access cooperatively organized, democratically managed housing where nobody is taking anything off the top. And so it means that we're able to not only have the benefit of being on a mortgage and being able to be stable within the housing market, but also that we are, unlike a landlord, not extracting a profit. So we're able to pass along those gains to tenants or members, basically, which is the actual relationship, is members of the organization who does have a right to live in the house. And so I'll just say that even 5 or 6 years ago, BCL is about 14 years old now, was when it first got its start. And so we're a fairly new group equity co-op. And we've been in this kind of process of building the organization, stabilizing and expanding to a point that we're sort of happy with what we can offer. And even 6 or 7 years ago, I felt like our monthly living costs, what you could call a rent, uh, were competitive, but they were just kind of in the middle of what the Bloomington housing market looked like. It was $600 a month, which includes, in our group equity context, a food cooperative buy. So that's maybe $200, $150 or $200, and then also utilities. So in terms of real rent costs, that $600 was closer to $350. And that was pretty good, but that was basically kind of competitive within a certain strata of Bloomington's housing market. And the kind of nice thing is precisely because of how we organize, because we've been able to stabilize with mortgages that we've been able to finance more easily than if any of these residents had tried to independently get single-family housing, we've been able to hold it basically at that. Our monthly costs have gone up, I think, about $40 from around, again, something like $580 to maybe $620 over that 5 or 6 years, at a time when the housing market has gone up by double-digit rates, every year for the past several years. And so now we are at a point where we're able to kind of hold our housing costs well below the market rate. And this is something I'm really kind of happy and proud about. It means that we really have the best quality housing for the best price, I think, anywhere in Bloomington. We're well below the threshold of what's considered affordable now. So I'll just say that's something I'm sort of very happy about, what we've been able to achieve with BCL using this group equity model. And so the very brief of it being that group equity, as Deb alluded to, is a strategy that's mostly been used by student housing co-ops. We've worked to systematically make our cooperative more age and race diverse, and to open it up to a broader set of strata across the community than sort of students, which is where it was maybe 10 years ago, as it really started out as a student co-op. And so now we have way more residents who don't have a relationship to the university. And I think we're sort of proving that it's possible to think about group equity co-ops, not just as student co-ops, but as a cooperative arrangement that answers needs for affordable housing in a sort of broader set of scenarios. And one thing that we still have taken with BCL from the student co-op model is that all of our co-ops with BCL are 12 bedrooms or larger, with a cooperative food buy, and basically the 12 is actually a kind of precise number that has to do with our particular way that we divvy out chores and tasks and committee seats in each house. And that means that pretty much all of our houses have cooperative meals 6 nights a week. I think this is in addition to sort of sharing costs and living responsibilities. This is an important part of cooperative organization, as Deb touched on. One of the issues with cooperatives versus condominiums is that people who live in limited equity apartment co-ops, have to have shared management of their buildings, but often experience their neighbors as kind of an alien and hostile presence in their building, because they don't have many structures that create sort of shared cooperative governance besides maybe monthly or seasonal meetings where they see each other mostly as pests, as people who make noise, or as people who are not doing this or that task, or people they disagreed with. And so the group equity model is really quite nice because it kind of sees to it that people have to have a kind of close working relationship that is just a different dynamic. But it means that to maintain that, our houses are a minimum of 12 bedrooms. So I'm not actually going to go through the Avalon Community Land Trust strategy as a different organization because it would take maybe too long. I don't want to eat up our discussion time. But what I'll say is that with ACLT, we were able to use 501c3 structures and bylaws to make an organization that is able to both do the kind of conventional CLT uh, sort of things in terms of land leases. We can talk about this if people are interested, but also to be able to be a host for what we're calling micro co-ops. And so we're experimenting right now. We're building a 7-bedroom co-op, which is big for a single family house, but is small for a co-op. And we believe that it's possible to kind of experiment to move the slider bar a little bit down and have a smaller co-op. It's a little bit easier to build and is able to have a lot of those benefits, but not be in this exact same structure that we've inherited on the BCL side from student co-ops. So basically, we're kind of experimenting with different kinds of holding strategies and different kinds of cooperative governance strategies to be able to build different kinds of housing that I think all still fill a niche that's being opened up by the housing crisis and the sort of the failure of other kinds of housing development to fully address the housing crisis. Two last notes that I'm going to make kind of along these lines are A, that in Bloomington, we've been able to secure in the last rewrite of the Unified Development Ordinance, the zoning here, an exception for cooperative housing so that if it's nonprofit, cooperative, and democratic, it doesn't matter if it's BCL, if it's ACLT, if it's, we want other people to be doing this. But, basically, if it fits those three criteria, any size cooperative house counts as a single family. And so this is a really significant incentive for cooperative development because it really makes life easy for a project as opposed to kind of getting into the whole world of variances, et cetera. And it's something that has been supported by all sides of the housing crisis kind of debate that people, that sort of across the board, people have a good reason to support this. So I'm happy to talk about that too. Lastly, I wanted to say that I think even in the past couple of months, the question of SROs, single room occupancy housing, has been become more of a sort of national topic of discussion, sort of drawing on the history of SROs. In Bloomington, there was a recent discussion with city government on SROs. This is kind of a thing that's happening all over. And I would say that this is obviously a kind of fraught history that the collapse of this SRO sector pushed a lot of people into really marginal or expensive housing situations over the past decades. But there's also this kind of history of slum housing. And that what I would like to insist on is that cooperative organization is a really good sort of response to the problems of SROs, and that we can think of a structure like BCL as being single room occupancy / group equity co-op, where there are not only a kind of absence of extractive or parasitic slumlords who made kind of a lot of SRO housing nightmarish, but also there's cooperative and democratic governance that creates structure and support for members and a sort of structure of mutual aid that makes it that I think is part of a kind of governance buffer on the sort of problems with SROs. So I really want to sort of think about, within the kind of spectrum or scheme of co-ops that Deb is tossing out, to also put this in dialogue with other kinds of sort of housing, palettes or sort of sets of options like SROs versus single family housing versus apartments, and really say that cooperatives have a lot to offer in terms of the SRO debate. So that's a few different things I wanted to toss out. I can talk a lot more about kind of what development and expansion has looked like for either of the structures I talked about, but I really want to kind of give at least half an hour for discussion, question, answer. And maybe if I could propose, if it's okay, just really brief introductions from everyone on the call, just because we want this to be a discussion. So just maybe, who you are, where you're from, if you have a particular kind of interest or, whether it's personal or professional in this work. So I would love it if we could kind of go around and jump in if that was okay with everyone.
Pick somebody, Hugh.
Mary, do you want to hop in and then popcorn to
Sure.
someone else?
Yep. Sure. I'll start. I'm Mary Morgan. I'm with an organization called Heading Home of South Central Indiana. We're working in a 6-county region based in Bloomington that is trying to make long-term system changes to strengthen housing security and make sure residents have a safe, stable place to live. We we rather ambitiously helped put together a housing action plan this summer that included a recommendation to achieve um, several thousand units, which are needed in this region of housing that's under $500 a month. So obviously, this is going to have to be some kind of subsidized or there are house sharing programs, other methods of achieving that price point in a market that, as Hugh alluded to, is just crazy high right now. So we're interested in cooperative housing, and I do have some questions, but I will bump it to Hillary.
Hi there. My name's Hillary Miles. I'm in Chesterton in Northwest Indiana. Actually three of my colleagues, Kathy Sipple, Nancy Knightley, and Adam Scartozzi were at the summit. Kathy forwarded me the link. I am definitely the least educated involved at the moment in cooperative living, but I think in our region, we're really excited and interested in cooperative farming, co-housing, eco-village kind of a situation in Porter County.
And then do you want to bat it to someone else?
I sure will. How about Shay?
Hello, my name's Shay. I'm a junior at Indiana University, and I'm also an intern for Heading Home. So I work with Mary, and I'm just on here today to listen to what all you guys have to discuss. And I'm just still learning lots of things when it comes to housing. So I'll be interested to hear more about cooperative housing. And I will popcorn it to Daphne.
Hi everyone. My name is Daphne Lavach. I'm the Director of Community Engagement with Patchwork Indy. Since we work a lot with refugees and obviously the immigrant community, so I'm here to learn and see how I can better serve the community we serve. Thank you. I'll popcorn it to Gabrielle.
Hi there. My name is Gabriel Pizer. I work at the Center for Rural Engagement as the Director of Community Initiatives. The CRE is a unit at IU that builds relationships between partners in rural communities that are tackling all kinds of different issues related to housing and public health and sustainability, and connecting them with people at IU who can support various projects. And so I was part of the group that helped to put on the housing summit, and part of what we were sort of thinking was, really trying to get a clearer picture of what's the nature of the support that would be most meaningful for rural communities that are trying to experiment with grassroots, community-based, and community-led housing solutions that are permanently affordable. And so I'm just excited to be on this call with folks who are thinking about some of these same questions. And I'll also just add, if you are in a process of starting to think about developing a project, or you're applying for grants or looking for grants, we're hoping that the CRE and also the Grassroots Housing Listserv can be a resource for folks who are really anywhere along the path of developing their projects. So just encouraging folks to utilize that listserv for updates and to ask questions, but also feel free to reach out directly to us at the Center for Rural Engagement. I'll put my email in the chat if you've got projects that you're working on and you want to talk about sort of where you're at and where you're going. But thank you all so much. It's very exciting.
there's two people I think who haven't introduced themselves, so I'll just toss it to Joe if you wanted to hop in with an introduction. Oh, and Aaron, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cut you out.
Hi, my name is Joan, short for Johanna Kofi. I am a former chaplain, and I am just kind of learning about housing options that may be available for some of the former clients that I've worked with in the past. And I'm just trying to stay connected as much as possible with housing.
I guess that leaves me. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Steve Buloff. I'm an attorney, as well as involved with Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation Social Action. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about this subject.
Fantastic. And Aaron, did you want to give a quick intro as well, or did...
If I can figure out how to unmute. Aaron Spiegel, Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance, one of the organizers of this Grassroots Housing Initiative. And I think, Mary, you said you had questions?
Yes. So my first question relates to something I think you and I have talked about. We are working, as part of our work, we are working with veterans who are at risk of homelessness or who are experiencing homelessness. And I'm wondering what the structure would look like for a cooperative, or if it would look different for a cooperative living situation that focused on a specific category of people, like veterans. And whether you could speak to what the governance or onboarding membership requirements, that kind of thing, would look like, or if that is something that would be possible.
Yeah, I think that that's very possible. I'll say that before getting to governance questions, that again, there's kind of this whole spectrum. It's kind of my image that I think of as kind of the slider bar, but you can move up and down in terms of density. As Deb mentioned, I think it's South Bend Mutual Homes that do really standalone separate houses, but they're organized as a co-op, all the way through to, single room only with shared kitchen, which is what some of our BCL houses look like. But that one of our, I think, most successful formulas, which we've only been able to build into one house, is these family suites, where people have the benefit of cooperative food buy, shared kitchen. It's also cheaper, for construction, fewer amortized costs, but where people in that house, there's both single rooms, but also these suites that have their own bathroom, 2 bedrooms, and an office or a playroom. And basically what we've said is we've set those aside for folks who are in any kind of caring relationship, either caring for children or caring for elders. And I think those suites come out to something like $900 a month for these 2 bedrooms. And so I think quite affordable, including, again, food buy, et cetera. So just to say that in terms of imagining different kinds of populations and people to support, I think there are, just even before we get to governance, kind of architectural and organizational solutions to make the kinds of spaces that will work for different kinds of people. And I'm really interested in that. And I think that that's one area where co-ops can support each other, and developing a stronger cooperative ecosystem where we're able to exchange that information, share plans, et cetera. I think that's important. I think one of the biggest challenges in terms of the kind of sector that you are bringing up is just the kind of seeding process of sort of how to start a cooperative culture, cooperative organization that's really rooted in, for example, what's shared between veterans, but where people are able to draw on their existing skills and their connections to be able to sort of run something cooperatively. And our experience, right, is that it's easiest to start a new co-op by seeding that with experienced cooperative residents and organizers. That's something that makes sense within a community like Bloomington, but we have to figure out how to really do that when starting, co-ops in some of these smaller cities where we're in discussion around the region that might be veteran-oriented or recovery-oriented co-ops. I'll say that we've had several veterans live in and pass through the co-op in the past year or two is we've tried to make it more accessible to a range of folks. And so I do think we can, for example, if you were to do this, link you with folks who are BCL veterans, who literally veterans of BCL, but also military veterans who'd be able to convey some of those things. I think that that's the biggest challenge, right? Is how to really start a kind of, virtuous cycle of meetings, of organized committees to really both deal with, just the sweet, good parts of organizing co-op, but also be able to deal with, the issues of living together, of cooperative life. And that for us, organization's been the solution to those problems. And so it's just a matter of figuring out how to do that. Yes, people have used housing vouchers at BCL. We've had some number of issues. It's basically just a legibility question, how to make, what we're doing at BCL, which is basically, if an agency that's giving out vouchers, really wants to see us, I think, accurately and generously, we are just extremely accessible housing that, is not taking a profit cut. So it's a really good investment, but where, we don't fit or slot in perfectly to, the sort of standard kind of categories of the housing market. So there have been issues with legibility and issues with people being able to explain what they're doing when they're getting either utilities support or rent support. But people have successfully done this, yes. One of our goals, and I think I've mentioned this to you, Mary, but I'll just say this for everyone else, is that, I really feel like this kind of question of democratic governance is important for supporting especially vulnerable populations like veterans, that's one of the ways that you really make it into an empowering and non-exploitative experience. And that one of the sort of strategies that co-ops have pursued while growing is to de-democratize and professionalize. And so with BCL, we've really tried as we've grown to not do that and to maintain the kind of strength democratic structures. Things are, we have one paid staffer for 80 bedrooms, and everything else is run through committee and is part of people really being engaged with their houses. And that's a requirement that we explain when people are applying. Like, you're going to do some amount of work. That's not that much, but some to maintain the houses every month. That's part of the mix. And that's part of a trade-off. And people who aren't suitable for that or who aren't interested in that, are not going to be great candidates, which also goes to your question about veterans in a different way, which there's some large number of veterans who are used to cooperative life in the military. And, this is something that's been extremely explicit in discussions with some of our residents, is that this is a structure that makes sense to them as veterans. But then also not, this is not a one size fits all solution where some people are not going to want to go in and be like, yes, I have to be in a meeting. I have to be in house meeting for an hour, and I also have to be in, my chore is being on the finance committee or something, and that's another half hour every week. Not everyone's going to want that. So, for me, it's like best thought of as part of an ecosystem rather than a sort of one size fits all solution.
Deb, you have any experience with, say, veterans housing?
Not specific to veterans, but what I would say, Mary, is that just as there are tons of different types of traditional co-ops like Blooming Foods or credit unions or whatever, housing co-ops are as unique to the community they serve. Like Hugh was saying, there is no one size fits all. So what's going to work for your veteran community may not work over here for a group of seniors. And most people don't walk into cooperative living knowing a whole lot about co-ops. So there's an education process that has to happen. And people have to understand what they're getting themselves into. Cooperative living is not for everyone. Sharing, whether it's in a house with, individual bedrooms and shared communal space, or it's individual apartments, it does take some getting used to. So all of that is part of the process of, as you're trying to organize any type of housing co-op, is bringing the potential members of the community together to talk about what does it actually mean to live in community with each other. So I think I think this is a great model specifically for veterans. Because as you mentioned, a lot of them are used to living in a communal space anyway, in barracks and even if they're in an apartment style living. So I happen to think, and I would say this about any kind of business opportunity, that co-ops are a terrific solution and something that should be looked in or experience or investigated further for the population that you're talking about.
And Mary, I promise I'll get to you in a second, Gabriel. I don't know about co-ops, but I do know about homelessness, and no single population has addressed it better than veterans. However, I would be curious to know, take a little research, if the VA would pay for something like this, because they've addressed veteran homelessness very well with a pretty specific model that they're using. And would co-ops fit into that model? I would hope yes, but I really don't know.
Can I just add really quickly to that point
Please.
particularly? Just to mention that the Center for Rural Engagement has done quite a bit of engagement with vet communities. A lot of it has been like arts-based programming for vets, as well as other kinds of veterans outreach. But we have good relationships through the CRE with both the VA as well as with people at the Department of Health who are thinking about veterans' needs. And so I would be happy to connect the person here at the CRE who's done most of that work, connecting with veterans, who is himself a vet. I think he might be really interested in thinking about how we could build some support for trying out some housing solutions for vets that are cooperative. And I think he would be a good resource to think with about where to go to get additional support.
That is great. Gabriel, I think I might have reached out to the person you're referring to, and then we just never actually closed the loop to connect. So I will. I think that's a great resource. And then we do every other week, we have a group that does veteran case conferencing, and staff from the VA who administer the vouchers for HUD, the veteran vouchers, are part of that, and they're very engaged. And I will ask them, because there is some limited flexibility that's, as you know. So, yeah.
So
Thanks
Mary,
for the feedback.
And feel free, if I assume you're talking about Todd
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you want to follow up with him and see if you can get through, that's great. If you want to reach out to me, I can make sure that loop gets closed and we can find a time for the two of you to talk or for the three of us to talk. So I'll follow your lead. Follow up with him, and if you don't get anywhere, reach out to me or just reach out to me first. Either one's fine.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, of course.
Questions?
One more thing I'll just say very briefly, and I managed to go down a different rabbit hole with my last response, but I just wanted to say briefly. So the thing that we're trying to do instead of adding more administrative staff is, I think, we wrote a grant for the opioid settlement, some of the money that's already been dispersed on the county level, to fund an experiment with hiring a social worker. And so for me, that's a sort of different pathway that not many housing cooperatives have explored, where what we're doing is we're building support in both sort of therapeutically, but also in terms of helping people fight for money that they're entitled to, but might have trouble accessing. So for me, this is kind of an experiment that I'm excited about that might also make housing cooperatives more accessible for populations that are under severe stress.
Who else? Well, while we're talking about specific populations, in our work, the most vulnerable are immigrants and refugees. And I'm wondering if Deb, you or Hugh have heard about any co-op projects specifically for that population.
I mean, we do know about if someone wants to speak to the work that's happening in Evansville. That might be a good, and I can gloss it very briefly, but I'm sure you could probably give more detail. But there's a colleague who also helped us some with planning the housing summit, who for years has been buying up very cheap housing in Evansville, and then through a sweat equity model, working with those new residents and him to rehab those properties. And then I believe basically sold at cost to members of the immigrant community down there. Mostly it's been the Haitian community there. And this is where I get a little bit fuzzy, but I think that they have sort of I don't know if it's a covenant of first refusal, where basically you sell it back to the organization that does the rehab when you're ready to sell that property. And then it sort of produces a sort of revolving door structure that they then use to fund the purchase of new housing to sort of continue to expand the housing that's available. I'm not sure I got all that right, so feel free to others jump in with more detail.
That's very close to right. Honestly, you're describing something that's like one step more forward planning than they currently do. But basically they've basically bootstrapped something very close to, I think, what Deb was describing as it's a structure that basically informally, they don't even use 501c3 bylaws for this, but they informally have created something like a land trust, or I forget which exact co-op model Deb mentioned for this, but where people essentially buy in, and then when they want to sell out, they sell out with no possible profit. There's not a growth according to cost of living or anything. So you buy a house for $10,000, you live in it as long as you want. I think there's some expectation of participation in the broader kind of co-op, but not very much. And that when you're done, you sell it for that amount. So actually, they mostly, and that's exactly through a right of first refusal covenant, as you said, Gabriel. But the funny thing is that they are so not oriented towards profit or even kind of maintenance, that they mostly have to fundraise to buy new houses. So they're not even extracting when people sell. They're not extracting enough to then expand. They mostly fundraise because the houses are like $2,000 to buy and $8,000 to fix. So it has to do with the particularities of the Evansville housing market, of a lot of decaying stock, but I think it's been very successful. But yeah, Gabriel, you had it pretty much right, but you were one step too optimistic.
Well, I don't want to hog all the questions, but I am really interested in any nuances between doing this in a rural community versus a larger city. Right now, we're working with some folks in Lawrence County, and as everywhere, there's just a lack of housing options, especially for folks who are lower income. And I'm wondering, Hugh, you mentioned, I think, you're working in some smaller cities or smaller towns. And I just wonder if there's any insights into challenges or advantages of that.
Well, so just to say, when we organized this summit last winter, one of our goals was to really develop the kind of cooperative ecosystem across Indiana, and that included kind of linking up with and supporting people in a variety of places that are thinking about co-ops. And our kind of challenge now is really to support them, so that especially when they're in places that are harder to access funding, just that already are facing other kinds of squeezes worse than Bloomington. So that's like one of our sort of challenges in terms of pushing this forward, but that's included places like Gary, Valparaiso, and Paoli. Paoli is the smallest of these places. And also we're in touch with a group in Columbus, Indiana, which again has a little bit more access, I think, to institutional support and funding. But it's really a matter of trying to link them up with and make sure that they have support to possibly make these projects happen. I would say, and so all of it's kind of in early stages in terms of making a jump for group equity co-ops to these smaller places. I think that, we've really thought about in our discussions with the folks in Paoli and Columbus, thinking kind of as you are, just like what are the specific axes and specific populations that, a co-op doesn't necessarily have to be formally committed or exclusively committed to supporting, but where we're organizing a co-op that's, really responding to like the recovery crisis, and is linking that or is at the intersection of recovery and housing costs as crises. That, and the thing is, just in a lot of, at least in Southern Indiana, I mean, the numbers I've heard in Spencer are also quite bleak in terms of just really where housing costs are going and where housing stock is. But like Paoli, I think it's a town of 2,500 where it's something like, 8 or 10 rentals are passing through the market every year, and so it's just a really kind of crazy housing crunch that's driving up costs. So people are paying Bloomington level rents in, a town that, the wage scale is just much worse than Bloomington's. So it's really, so anyway, so the point being that the context is there, I think, to support co-ops. But that in it beyond this kind of economic determination, I think having a specific access or a specific, are you in relation to a church? Are you in relation to the recovery community? Are you in relation to veterans? I think those are all kind of great options as sort of possibilities. And I think there is also just this question of how to sort of do organizational support, so that in particular, the kind of application funnel can be built. Because in a town like this, where there is this kind of housing pressure, there's lots of people who are looking for housing. And again, because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, you need to have enough applicants that you can really sort of say to people, you have 40 applicants, you have 12 bedrooms, and it's not that you want competition, but you want to really be able to allow people to self-select and say, oh no, I actually don't want to be doing dinner with people a couple times a week, or I don't want to, be doing chores in a way that I'll be held accountable for.
Mary just reminded me of some data that I've been playing around with, and the misperception that this is an urban problem, particularly in Indianapolis. It's not. If you look at the second list there, counties that are the most severe housing cost burden, where people are paying over 50% of their income in housing, are Marion County's in there, but they're mostly more rural counties. So this is something we're working on at the State House, because legislators think, oh, this isn't our problem. This is happening in the cities, and it's not. So it's a yes, and not a yes, but.
Thanks, Aaron. One more thing I was curious about. What about criminal backgrounds? Is that factored in typically in, are there background checks similar to other kinds of leases that are out there?
I mean, we try with BCL to sort of be, on a track that's kind of like housing equity plus. We're really trying to think about, not just, maintaining the basics of kind of anti-discrimination rules when it comes to housing applications and membershiping meetings, but really trying to remove other boundaries and not think in ways that are, for example, carceral, et cetera. And so, I think that is a calculation in terms of some of that sort of extra work to really remove barriers in terms of criminal records. I think that's like house by house. I'm on the board. I'm not a member of BCL because I don't live in BCL. And so I have basically nothing to do with decision making on who lives in the houses besides kind of general levels of principle. And the residents have themselves directed, this sort of discussion towards being increasingly accessible and increasingly diverse as a structure. But so it's also house by house, the way that we work. And I think this goes also to this kind of rural questions. We really benefit from having a large funnel. People apply to the organization overall, and then are basically funneled towards houses that have openings where they then have a membershiping meeting that basically looks like coming and preparing dinner and cleaning up from dinner and talking to other residents over that meal. To really be able to sort of say, like, is this someone who is either experienced with living with other people or is open to developing those skills? And that's on some level the most important thing, and then also for residents to be able to say, are there other issues that might be deal breakers, but really trying to not make that map onto things like criminal record.
Ooh, we're at 1 o'clock. I'm sorry. I'm not paying attention. A reminder, the October session is October 23rd. And I'll put the link to that in here. And the topic of that is, how do you even get started? Community organizing. Then November 20th is on financing and show me the money. So there will be emails going out before all of those sessions. And we really want to know what you want to know about. If there are topics you want to have covered before we meet again in March, please put that out on the list and we'll see if we can do that. So, go ahead again.
Very quickly. I don't know. So I want to just encourage folks to use that listserv. It's being underutilized, but I think it would be really valuable for that to be a sort of more vibrant space where people are posing, they don't have to be super well-developed questions. It's just like we're all kind of working this stuff out together. So please share your updates and, roadblocks that you encounter on that, just to help that conversation move forward. And then I'd also say, Deb, do you want to talk about this 8-week co-op virtual academy thing that's happening? And maybe we can send that out to folks as well.
Sure. So we have started this week on Monday. It's an 8-week kind of tutorial on cooperatives and how to start a co-op, which would include housing cooperatives. It's not going to get into the same level of detail if we were just talking about housing cooperatives, but I think there's no cost to attend. It's virtual. It's from 6 to 8, 6 to 7:30 or 8 each, every other Monday, ending on December the 30th. And I believe that Gabriel, you sent that link out to the listserv or the people who attended the summit, correct?
I think I did send it out on the Grassroots Housing.
You did.
Listserv.
We'll do it again.
Okay. And if there's anybody that's on today that's not on that listserv, we can add to that. You're welcome to join us. The first session was a very basic primer on what is a co-op. And each week we'll go a little bit more in depth about how to start a cooperative. The next one will be talking about the vision mission on October the 7th, governance on October the 21st, community organizing on November the 4th, feasibility analysis on the 18th of November, financials on December the 2nd, the business plan on the 16th, and then on the 30th, the incorporation process. So love to have you join us if you are interested in learning more about the co-op business model and how to start one.
Deb, are those sessions being recorded?
Yes. Yep. Doing our best to make sure we get them recorded and make them available.
Well, thank you, folks.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, for helping convene this, and thanks for everyone
Sure.
who hopped on and also helped organize it. I'll say, if anyone has follow-up questions that they would want to ask, or just like, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes after the kind of group discussions ended.
Well, I'm going to make you the host then, because I have to leave.
Okay. Good to see you, Aaron.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, all.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Aaron.